Hi guys, Paul
Yep.
Capon from the innovation community here. Today I'm here with Dr. Yogesh Malhotra. Yogesh has worked with a number of major organizations for a number of years on their AI and machine learning and blockchain strategies. So we're really lucky to have him with us. Thanks for joining us, Yogesh.
Hey, thank you, Paul. It's a pleasure. And again, congratulations to you and Jacob on the launch of Innovation Community. Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here today. I think you asked, sorry, go ahead, please.
We're delighted to have you as well. Just start by telling our guys a bit about yourself, because you've got a very interesting background that they'll want to hear about.
Well, thank you, Paul. I build CEO, CIO, CTO, and CRO practices, technologies, teams, and ventures. I started doing that with the beta version of the World Wide Web browser, something early 90s, and I built the world's largest digital transformation network. We had direct clients and patrons like Goldman Sachs, Google, Intel, IBM, Microsoft at that time, and worldwide firms and organizations which were our members in our network. And people like Bill Gates of Microsoft and Vice Chairman of PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Coopers, they adopted and recommended our technologies and ventures at that time. Now I work with CEO, CXO teams, building technologies, practices, teams, and ventures in AI, machine learning, cybersecurity, cryptography, blockchain, cloud computing, and quant finance and trading. Most of my intersections. Thank you.
What really interests you about having a career working with data and these huge organizations?
A fascinating question. Most of my work has been with big organizations, but it has been in a very startup mode, starting with my first focus on data, which was coming from process engineering background, joining the big three IT, big three banking finance firms, building global financial systems worldwide. And then what really fascinated me about data was when the World Wide Web came. I was playing with the web on the side while doing PhD, and all of a sudden I saw things getting written up in the press, and we got covered pretty much starting with CIO magazine. We got covered up in the most IT publications, and then we had interviews with the Wall Street Journal, Business Fortune coming to us. It was very surprising. Never thought it would happen in that way. But I think it was the World Wide Web, and we were one of the earliest players trying to do some interesting things which came to be known as digital transformation. Therefore, I think that is where I can say it was kind of looking at a global scale, millions of worldwide users using our services, 130,000 plus active members contributing in our practices, and a team of 200 PhDs, which we built from ground up virtually to build and scale those practices. So that is where I think we started, and that is what hooked me to data.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. And you've touched on a couple of the organizations that you've been working with over the years. Can you just tell us about a time that you affected change in one of those organizations?
I think it's an excellent question. The change for us, basically, coming from big three IT, big three banking firms, where I was used to already rolling out global systems, was starting to look at the web and say, geez, can we scale it worldwide? Can we have membership from every country in the world? Say maybe every block. And I think we cannot reach at that point. But in trying to do so, in trying to build the various verticals, which became known as digital transformation practices, what we realized in the process is our B2C services we give away for free, but in the B2B side, we got to work with some of the companies I named earlier. Now, many of those clients, basically, we had IBM coming to us, with Ogilvy pitching them to us in 1998. We had Intel coming to us in 2001, asking consulting for next generation e-business architectures. Google came to us before IPO in 2004 and so forth. But more fascinating than that, what we saw, given that we had no fees to join our network, we had pretty much most known organizations in the world, including the biggest technology names, the biggest finance banking names, and so forth. The most known bank, investment bank, which we know of, that had at least 30 members signed off from their office addresses, including C-level people, for example. Therefore, the transformation for me which started, which coming from a background in specific big companies, was more scaling globally, where I had in my network all kind of companies, starting from the biggest firms to very small startups, sitting in, say, Europe somewhere where they were telling me, giving me feedback, geez, why don't you turn the blink off? Because when we had set up some blink tags, and what it caused in their area was getting those terminals go on and off. What we were able to build is one of the first instances of a global network which was accessible to everyone worldwide, including the big four companies and the biggest institutions, as well as the smallest firms and individuals worldwide. That's, I think, what we accomplished. Therefore, our familiarity kind of was able to span the needs of the biggest companies to the smallest startups and individuals, starting from that point on.
Absolutely. And what was the biggest impact that you made on an organizational transformation?
Again, the impact is the ongoing thing. Impact, some companies, some practices, or some consulting firms, they work for one company set of clients. Now, we have been kind of building practices in certain areas. Over time, what we have done, starting with the digital, for instance, we have gone on to launch, create, build new practices in what we call as quant, cyber, crypto, and quantum. Therefore, many of our practices which we launched having been written as pioneer in business technology management, in knowledge management, in virtual organizations, in complex systems, then later on in fintech, more recently in areas which are now being called human-centered AI, augmented AI. Most of this work goes back, say, 25 years. It spans multiple companies. And the neat thing is it covers specific companies in specific sectors, like we had clients which are named for digital transformation. Going beyond digital transformation, for the quant phenomena, we started looking at quant risk modeling and quant risk models. We worked with the biggest investment banks, hedge funds in Wall Street, companies like JP Morgan Private Bank, helping lead their quant models beyond the global financial crisis. Beyond that, we are looking at the cyber phenomena. That is what we did with the state of New York, pioneering the execution of what typically gets called zero trust architectures and network security segmentation at an enterprise level for a New York county. Then that work was taken over further, bringing it back to the Griffiths Air Force Research Lab area, trying to link the finance and the global defense aspects at a national global level. And what we are seeing in headlines right now, that's what we were doing starting about 5-6 years ago. Therefore, that work built into what we are seeing right now in various ventures which are kind of out there with CEO, CXO teams, including the CXO teams for the United States Air Force headquarters. We are working on a commercial AI machine learning exchange. We are also working with other teams in pioneering for the next generation robo trading ventures. In addition to that, we have been earlier working with blockchain cloud computing ventures for scaling these ventures to provide the lowest cost, high quality, high security storage systems. So these are some examples out there. There are a number of others, but these are some representative examples.
Interesting. And it sounds like you had a lot of success during your career. What do you think was, in your opinion, one of the biggest mistakes you made?
I think the biggest contribution was, I look at most of my contributions in terms of impact. Now, many organizations, traditionally, they come from financial and technological capital. Now, most of my focus has been most on the social capital, intellectual capital, and human capital. And that's where I think we have made the greatest contributions, what many companies like Deloitte nowadays say about social responsibility. We were created as a social digital enterprise. Therefore, instead of looking at what we can get, we said how we can deliver and contribute at the world scale. And that's what we've been able to do, fortunately, in both large-scale modes for specific enterprises, getting to work with the smartest people doing smartest things across different industries. Also building a global network of very smart people, bringing them together into a global virtual community of practice. That was a very fascinating experience. Now we are working on trying to build the next generation of the same community, but for the era which goes beyond to AI machine learning. In a way, we can consider this pioneering what is called AGI, or Advanced General Intelligence. Now, traditionally, most people come from computer science, and that's where the focus has been. But having recently led and guided 200 management leadership executives for the MIT AI Business Strategy Program, what I have seen, the top MIT computer scientists, top psychologists, top mathematicians from top programs like MIT, Harvard, Columbia, most of them recognize the critical importance of the human factor. Therefore, I think our background and practices, which have focused very strongly on human capital, social capital, and knowledge capital, where we have been adding value from the very beginning to now, I think that is going to matter much more going forward. Because that's where I think we see the biggest contribution in trying to A, help companies recognize, despite the headlines which say we do not need humans at all, we can have robots which will replace them, we think no, it's different. We think when we use smart systems, we need smart people even more to use those systems smartly. Now, we have introduced articles and keynotes on what we have been calling smart minds using smart tools smartly in various forums which are available online. Because that is our key contribution. If we can think of one, smart minds using smart tools smartly. The new terms we are hearing are human-centered AI, AI augmentation. But I think finally they will get to the same point what we have been talking about for the last 15 years or so.
Interesting stuff. And just a couple of final questions. Looking back, if you could change one thing about your career, what would that be?
I think one thing which I will change, it goes back to some of the early days of the World Wide Web. I was invited to keynote one of the keynotes in the Silicon Valley for Silicon Valley venture capitalists, angel investors, CEOs, organized by one of the big angel investors worldwide organizations there. And I was invited to help them understand how to build global digital enterprises on the World Wide Web. Those were the early days, Amazon.com was still trying to kind of create credibility. And I think Yahoo was yet to be incorporated at that time. They had a business plan. And at that point of time, I pitched one of the very famous venture capitalists from Silicon Valley. And I kind of mentioned to him, we have this global digital transformation network, and we have built it on top of the top digital site, top 3 search engine, top 10 social network. Now, having these 3 pieces, what I asked for him was kind of, if he can give me $1 billion funding to kind of take it to 32 billion in the matter of next few months or years, But in retrospective, I think that was a very big amount. Most venture capitalists at that time did not give $1 billion funding. But seeing where that vision has gone now, in case the top digital site right now is Amazon.com, the top search engine right now is Google, which came to us as a client in 2004, and top social network is Facebook. What we were thinking of is way ahead of the times, but I think we are delighted to see that our vision did come true, but we didn't execute it because of the reasons, but we were doing some more interesting things where we arrived in trying to invent the future of artificial intelligence and how we can apply it worldwide based on some practices we are seeing recent interest in by even the top institutions in the world like Stanford, Berkeley, and MIT, with focus on the human side of AI, which we see a lot of interest in, coming from the smartest people as some of the smartest places in the world.
And what's the best piece of advice you ever received?
There's a number of pieces of advices, and we stand on shoulders of giants. A lot of other people who have built the foundations in information systems, systems dynamics, complexity theory, cybernetics, information theory. A lot of those things have gone in the foundation. But I think if I have to boil it down to the gist of it, from an innovation perspective, what is most critical, absolutely critical thing? I think that is basically when we are able to continuously reinvent ourselves. Although sometimes the change most companies go through is gut-wrenching change. And I think in that respect, one of the quotes is from a book called Illusions by Richard Bach. He was a flyer and aviator. And that quote was basically very simple. It is basically related to the learning paradigm, which goes back to Peter Senger's learning organizations and so forth. But the quote simply here is, what the caterpillar calls the end of the world, the butterfly, the master calls the butterfly. Therefore, what we have seen our evolution as over the span of time, evolution of various technologies, practices, and ventures, in addition to all the companies we work with, which become pioneers in the world, they go through the same phase, going from the caterpillar to butterfly. An example I can give, at one point of time, Google was trying to sell itself for $1 million to Excite, which was a search engine in the early days. And they couldn't even sell them for themselves $1 million. But that was the caterpillar stage, Now where Google is, it's a butterfly. But now they are going to evolve to the next phase, which will be the next generation of butterflies. Therefore, I think that's a very good way of looking at it, because it helps us focus on the future vision, which helps to make us better, stronger as we go further.
Absolutely, and it sounds like you've not just received advice; you've got a lot of advice to give. What advice would you give for aspiring leaders in data in terms of creating this new future?
There are three pieces of it. I think we already see everyone in the industry is asking that we need to focus on data from a business outcomes or business performance perspective. But we need to take it a few steps further. Now, we have been building those practices in our various ventures and thought leadership. And one thing is we need to get beyond the debate on big data, small data, to data that really matters. And I think that is very critical. We saw everyone jumping on big data. Then we said, no, big data has issues. Now even it's small data, specifically in AI machine learning. But if we cut through a chase and look at how data actually gets applied, what data should you even consider? What should you trust? And to what level, Therefore, I think finally it will go to make sure focus on data that really matters, which can change over time as we are building, growing, evolving. That's the first point. And our MIT AI Machine Learning Executive Guide, which is online on my LinkedIn homepage as well as my personal homepage. My personal homepage is simply my first name, last name.com, yogeshmalhotra.com. That guide, which is openly available to everyone, which was built while leading this team of 200 leaders from companies like Google, Microsoft, that's available to everyone. That gives a very specific focus on how we can not only think of data, but various technologies, including the strategic frameworks and the human factor to get the best out of data in various contexts. If I would sincerely recommend they have a look at this guide, which is open, available freely. The second point, which I think is very critical, very relevant, although many people recognize it implicitly, they have to recognize it more explicitly. That is about data quality and data reliability. I would go a few steps deeper. Given our depth in the cybersecurity domain, already building practices in that area, we need to look at data integrity and data authenticity in terms of data reliability and validity. So that is where our practices, for example, my recent presentation at the New York State Cybersecurity Conference talks of AI machine learning deepfakes and how do we need to tackle that issue. Therefore, we need to have a better, much more deeper, more sophisticated understanding of data for ensuring data integrity and data quality. Those are very critical issues. The final issue, which I think goes back to the human factor and the human side. We are hearing a lot about AI machine learning biases and so forth. Now, I think when we hear about technology or data or information, typically the discussion starts assuming if a certain technology or data information is good or bad. But finally, what we see getting realized, that applies to even models, all models, all algorithms. There's nothing good or bad. All these technologies are artifacts. What makes them good or bad is what we do with them. Okay, that's where it is even more critical to think of all these technologies, including not only data, but also your algorithms, models, everything else, all technical artifacts as tools. There were smart minds using smart tools smartly. Now, how we can do that? We need to make sure how people can understand. Take the same pieces of tools, technologies, algorithms, what they have, they can outcompete, outbetter others. When we started in the beginning, we started on a shoestring. I had about $3,000 on my credit card, and I went to compete with the multi-billion-dollar companies trying to create value propositions so that the biggest companies in the world, like IBM, Intel, and Google, would come to me without spending a single dime in advertising. That is the power of intuition, imagination, creativity, insight. And I think going in the future, individuals who deploy better imagination, better intuition, better insight, with specific focus on business performance outcomes, would outsmart and outcompete others who are trying to find meaning in data.
Absolutely, Yogesh. Some really great stories there, some really great insights. Thanks so much for joining us.
No, thank you. Likewise. And the discussion which I just had with you about the human side, I have been given presentations again at Princeton for over the last 4 years. They are available online, again openly available from my homepage, from SSRN page. They can be downloaded from Model Risk Arbitrage, a site which talks about that. Those presentations focus on this specific thing. And they kind of say three things. Most people focus on math. But having built through math for the last 15 years, what I advise in a very summary fashion of 3 points, make sure understand the math. But more important than that, make sure understand the limits of math. But more important than that, make sure utilize your intuition to make sense, because math has limitations. Math is not foolproof. Okay, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Yogesh.